Okay, welcome everybody to our weekly call where we talk about updates related to COVID, but also this week we unfortunately want to talk a little bit about the governor's budget. I wanted to remind everybody that we have a bunch of webinars and things coming up, and by the end of the day today or first thing tomorrow, you're also going to be getting an invitation to our first annual first to three virtual conference where we have some really great training that you can register for your 0 to 3 staff. So stay tuned for that. And we also set up a couple of new, one of the things that we've been thinking about as an association is how to support you guys in an ongoing way. And DCYF is doing ongoing sort of ed manager calls and things like that. And I know that the regional TNTA have that kind of component call. But when we looked at the list, it looked like 0 to 3 teachers and home visitors didn't really have that same kind of opportunity to get together and talk to each other. And so we've set up a couple of weekly meetups for your staff who do that kind of work to call in and talk to each other about what's going on in their area and what's working and what's not. And so, so I just wanted to let you guys know about that. So without further ado, Joel, would you like to start with the
press conference
budget update? And I'm going to mute all of you, but feel free to unmute yourselves if you want.
Okay. So, well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. We have another great turnout for these calls, and I appreciate that. So let me give you a little update on what happened with the budget. Couple things for one of them is that, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
I was unmuted. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to mention is that and this is sort of obvious, but important to note, things changed between state lawmakers passing their budget and the governor making a final decision on what to maintain in the budget and what to veto. So that's sort of, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, for some of the parents out here, but maybe some of the staff too, what's different about the state government and the federal government are two things that I think are really important. At the federal level, there's not a balanced budget amendment, right? And even though Republicans in Congress have tried to push that over a number of years, especially when Katie and I were in college, that was one of their favorite topics, was the balanced budget amendment. But they don't have a balanced budget amendment or requirement, which means that they can spend money and they can put the federal government into a deficit in order to stimulate the economy or to pay for wars or whatever they want to spend money on. The state government, most state governments, I think only Vermont doesn't have this requirement, but almost every state government has a requirement to balance their budget. We have a tighter requirement in our state, which requires a 4-year budget forecast. So it has to be budgeted out over a 4-year period of time. That happened when Senate Republicans took over in our state house, and that was part of the agreement. It's actually probably the most stringent budget requirement of all the states in the country. So it means that if you take an action now, you need to budget it out several years later, up to 4 years, and forecast those dollars out. So if you give money to something, if you give an increase, you also have to budget that a couple years down the road, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that's different about the state government than a federal government, at the federal government level, the president can veto something or sign something. What's different at the state level, and what's different in most state governments, is governors have something called a line item veto. That means that they can, rather than vetoing the entire budget or signing the entire budget, they can veto portions of the budget. So they can veto sections of the budget. So I just think that's important for you to know. So when the governor on Friday looked over the budget, what became clear is there's a budget deficit because of a lack of economic activity, right? There's fewer people paying sales tax in particular. And we could be, rather than having an economy that was probably one of the hottest economies in the country, to have an economy that's really suffering because we're so reliant on sales tax, that we're actually facing a deficit. So the governor had to decide which things to maintain and which to veto, and he has the power to do that through a line item veto. Well, the governor decided that for the most part, they would maintain funding for most programs, even new spending programs. Um, and things like housing and affordable housing, homelessness, all the increases that state lawmakers agreed to during the legislative session was maintained. Um, but he did cut some things. He cut all the funding for new guidance counselors, training for paraeducators. I think if we're all being honest, his main interest really is around climate change, but he even cut $50 million out of a climate change fund um, that state lawmakers were able to budget in the session. Now, when it came to early learning, um, honestly, he maintained most of the funding for early learning. So things like the Working Connections childcare rate increase to get everybody up to the 65% of market rate, um, he maintained. He also put money in the budget to support one of our policy priorities, which was to allow homeless children to better access childcare, regardless of their work activity. He signed the 12-month authorization bill. So rather than just being authorized for a subsidy, once you actually get care, then your clock starts ticking. And he signed something around a community pathway for some folks that have to meet the professional development requirements that DCYF has mandated. When it came to ECAP, I told Katie I'm a bit disappointed. Katie's very disappointed. We're probably all mad. But what he decided to do is there were two components to the ECAP budget that state lawmakers agreed to. One of them was to create what they refer to as a special needs fund, or what we call a complex needs fund. And they put $2 million in that fund. And that fund was to provide ECAP programs additional resources children with special needs, children with a lot of challenging behaviors, in places where ECAP programs needed more one-on-one support in the classroom, or to lower teacher-child ratios, or for mental health consultation. Um, and then separate from this special needs fund was a rate increase of 5% across the board. And that was more expensive, right? That was about $7 million. And at the end of the day, the governor decided to veto the 5% rate increase, but keep the complex needs fund, which, uh, you know, obviously we don't like that, right? We spent the entire session advocating for you guys to get the kind of rate increase you needed to be able to serve, and basically first to provide services to kids that you already have, but also so you could be in a position to expand as we get closer to the ECAP entitlement. So that put us in a real difficult spot. Now there were a few other things in early learning that you might not have paid as close attention to that also got cut. There was an effort to try to reduce childcare copays that was included in the budget, but the governor vetoed that. There were some things around postpartum maternal depression stuff that was vetoed, around Medicaid rate increases and things like that. So there were a number of things that got cut. The total was well over $200 million for this fiscal year, and over $400 million over the 4-year projection. That's probably not going to be enough. I mean, they're estimating that right now that the deficit is probably somewhere between 1.5 and 2 billion, but that will grow if this continues, the crisis continues, and the economy is not able to function the way that it normally would. We do have money in the bank. And what I mean by that is we also in our state have something called an emergency stabilization fund. Basically, it's the rainy day fund. It's raining. There's about $3 billion in that fund. So there's a potential that could offset the need to do some more significant cuts. Now, the question that you might be asking is, well, now what? Well, there's likely to be a special session in the coming weeks, probably month or two-ish, maybe the fall. I don't think we know, maybe the summer, where lawmakers will gather for a 30-day session. The governor needs to call that. That could be a session where we come back and say, hey, ECAP programs are providing all these modified services. They are absolutely on the front lines of making sure children and families who are living in deep poverty and are traumatized as a result of this current crisis, they need more support. Please help us. And I'm sure there'll be other social services that'll be doing the same. At the same time, lawmakers will probably also be looking to make some cuts. And that's probably a more likely scenario. Because if you're thinking that, there's a growing deficit in our state and the governor only made $200 million worth of cuts in an over 50 something billion, $53 billion budget, that's not a lot, right? Even with money in the bank, that's not a lot. So you could be looking at a special session where more cuts are on the table. So part of our job over the next couple months or so to prepare for the special session is to catalog the work you're doing with families that are living in poverty, how the coronavirus, what you guys are doing on the front line, both when classrooms are open, but also the modified services you are doing, especially, I imagine, the family support work, and documenting that and telling that story, and then coming back in the special session. We also might be playing defense too. So just so you guys know, in terms of, as we're thinking about this, we'll be trying to make the case for more money. We also might be in a position where the state looks to make cuts, not just to us, but to other programs that our families rely upon. And so we could be making some defensive maneuvers as well. Personally, we haven't decided as a board. We have a board meeting coming up in April, but personally, I think there should be more of a shared sacrifice approach to this, and I hope the governor looks at that. And what I mean by that is, I joke a lot that I live in Kirkland. All of you live in different places around the country. As Katie said, my office is my car, and it's the streets of Kirkland. And I'm walking around the streets of Kirkland. I'm seeing 3-story, million-dollar mansions with people who are doing very well, probably still trying to get it, if they can, trying to get a relief check somehow, or trying to tap into some kind of business. Some of those people could pay more, and they could pay more so that we don't have to do as deep of cuts potentially to ECAP or food assistance or some of the other programs of the Housing Trust Fund that could be on the table during a special session. So we're going to have some conversations at our board meeting, what kind of advocacy, but part of it will be defending our space in early learning and the larger early learning landscape. Part of it is defending the social service safety net. But part of it, I think, too, will be making sure that if there are cuts, that the burden is shared so that low-income people aren't facing the brunt of it, that some of the people at the top of the income scale could contribute a little bit to this during a difficult time. So those conversations will be difficult, I think, in our state house, but that's important for us to have as you're thinking about it. Now, the other thing I'll just say really quickly before I open it up for questions, after the special session, then we'll be going into January 2021. That was going to be the session that Katie and I tried to make sure that lawmakers and the governor got the entitlement on track. The entitlement is supposed to hit, I think it's 22, 23. So lawmakers, we were planning to say, okay, now it's time to make that commitment. Give them the rate increase, give them the number of slots, mostly full and extended day, to make the entitlement happen. I don't think we know what our advocacy will look like when 21 comes around. It could be that, in another month or two or even 3, things are back open and the economy's humming and people are going out to eat and doing all kinds of stuff. And, there isn't a major deficit, or, we're not in that place, or we open and close. We just don't know how this is going to go. But know that after the special session, there'll be another longer session where they'll be having to come up with another 2-year budget, and that'll be coming after the election. And so we'll have to give some thought. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, not just to make sure that early learning is well funded and well protected, but that the social safety net that the state the state has in place is maintained. Again, remember, the state has to meet a balanced budget requirement. And that'll be very difficult if the state's not receiving enough funding to do that from the feds, right? The feds are going to be a large part of our advocacy as well, because without the federal help, that means the state has to make more cuts. If the federal government doesn't come through with enough money for childcare subsidies, the state has to find money somewhere, right? And the state can't go into a deficit in order to do that, like the federal government. So there's a lot of work for us to do. We all, just for 10 seconds on the federal side, we are helping to lead the coalition's work on the federal side of things to try to get funding for childcare subsidies. And, I don't know if we know what's going to happen at the federal level. They are arguing with each other about, what does the next stimulus package look like? The last email I got this morning was that they were pulling back from another big package in April when they come back and looking at more technical changes. But I think the coalition's goal is to be able to pump enough money into childcare subsidies that the need to cut other things like ECAP or other social safety net programs or other K-12 programs isn't necessary. So we're both fighting at the federal level, but also at the state level to make things happen. Anyway, let's stop and just see if there are any questions at all. I know people are naturally frustrated about the ECAP rate increases being vetoed. We are as well. It is heartbreaking because not only the amount of time, but I know how badly you guys needed it and what was some of the services that were being degraded. And I know that we just saw an article, I saw it over the weekend, and Katie posted it about Vashon Island and how their school district is already trying to decide whether or not to cut their ECAP program. I'm assuming there will be other school districts that also start looking at that. So we're in a tough spot. There is going to be a little bit of money for ECAP. DCYF will be in a position to figure out how the special needs funds work and how easily those dollars will be administered. So we don't know the answer to that just yet, but hopefully we will soon.
So Teresa Schneider has asked if there's any information about the new 2020-21 expansion awards, meaning are these going forward or not being cut? And Teresa, and I've actually had this question from a couple of people, that's part of last year's budget. So those are just moving ahead. And if there's any additional information, Nicole Lohr can share it, but I think that's just moving ahead as expected.
Yeah, it's not impacted by, the cut is only on the rate increase itself, and not on the number of slots or the, so just so you know that.
Yeah. Other questions?
Kevin Rutherford, you look tired.
You can unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat. Joel, did the bill that would start the childcare subsidy 12 months when the child found a slot, did that pass, or was that vetoed as well?
I think that
he's frozen. Joel?
From what I seen, it passed.
Passed, yeah.
That's what I saw.
Yeah, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, that'll make a difference. Don't forget, the other thing is that the student parent policy is still alive and will start up, I think, this summer. The homeless childcare policy starts up this summer. Just so if you're not familiar with the homeless childcare, if a parent is homeless, they will have a full year to meet the work activity. Now, of course, that's even more important now. But if you do have some families using Working Connections childcare, the grace period moves from 4 months to 12 months. Let me see. David has a comment. I didn't get a chance to look. around the message about crisis, wondering if we made our case strong enough that all ECAP, especially school day, are part of the state.
So Joel, when you read something out like that, you have to read it slowly because Maricela is interpreting.
David said, did we make the case strong enough? I don't think we did.
So you need to read the whole thing because.
Sorry, Dave. Let me do this.
We're interpreting here.
Okay. Clearly and happily, the legislature and governor have gotten message about crisis in childcare. Wondering if we made our case strong enough that all ECAP, especially school day and work day, are part of the statewide childcare solution. Stacy said, "Good point, David. Most of our slots are working day. Families depend on us for childcare." I think we didn't. I think the answer is no. I don't think we made that case strong enough. And I think that's the case that we need to make moving forward. I don't think they saw ECAP in the same light as they saw childcare. And I think as they were trying to determine, what to keep in the budget and what not to, I think they saw the rate increase as not something as urgent as the childcare, right? The way they had to decide this is it's not like that he could decide, well, I'm going to cut a little bit of the childcare base rate so I can maintain ECAP funding. He had to either cut all the childcare rate increase or cut, one out of the two or all of the two of ECAP's funding in terms of his power. But honestly, I don't think we did enough in the time that we had to make the case that, we were absolutely critical to this and telling that story. And I think we need to do that moving forward.
And, we just had this conversation earlier today about how the work that we do with families around resources and trauma and all of that is going to be even more important as we continue through this COVID crisis than even it was before. And come this fall, I think that we're going to, there's going to be a huge need for that wraparound approach for families that's not necessarily going to be available in a childcare.
Mm-hmm. But thank you for that question. And we're going to try to ramp up our advocacy on that message.
So Nancy Trevina says, I realize there are two separate pots of money for ECAP and K-12 funding, but it would be better to see TK, that's transitional kindergarten funding, go away to preserve ECAP since the services are comprehensive. Yeah, Nancy, so one thing is that the budget included funding to do some planning and implementation around transitional kindergarten, and that money was vetoed. But that's not actually a good news situation for us, because that was the support that OSPI and DCYF needed to be able to sort of go away from this Wild West transitional kindergarten approach and to something that is more intentional and developmentally appropriate and standards-based than it is now. So that'll be a whole nother ball of wax that we'll be pursuing in the next couple of months.
Katie, can I ask you, or if Nicole might be able to answer even with their fan on, what kind of data do we have from DCYF about what ECAP programs are currently doing, whether they're modified services or open? Or I know they were doing some surveys and data collection.
Karen said she was going to send it to us, and I know Nicole is working on that very report, and so I expect to see that, I don't know, today, tomorrow?
Okay, Nicole had. I'm doing something similar with Head Start as well. I want to, let's see.
All of these guys are required to share that information through ELMS or whatever with their specialists, and so they're collecting all the information.
Right, but clearly, I had a call this morning, and we were talking a little bit about this. In this environment, the question is how urgent are you, right? So it can't be something that people like or is a good policy, or how necessary are you? And we have to, as we move forward, we have to be able to tell that story, as David and Stacy, and I'm sure others are on this call are thinking the same thing. We need to describe how we're not just necessary, we're urgent. We're going to be taking care of kids who are going to need a lot more support. We're doing that now. We're also a child care provider. So we need to be able to tell that story effectively, not just to recoup some of what we might have lost through the veto, but potentially to protect. Look, the cat came in to say a few words. To protect funding moving forward. And so anyway.
Other questions?
Let's see. Okay, David has one. Will we ask DCYF to form a work group to help guide processes for 2.2 million in complex needs? It's not going to go very far, and if it's too diluted, we'll have difficulty showing impact. That is a good suggestion. Nicole, we would like DCYF to form a work group that includes people like David and others to help you determine how to spend that money. Can you chat back yes or no and tell us whether or not you would be agreeable to that? That wasn't voluntary. Yeah. David said he would be happy to lead it. Thank you. But yeah, we don't want it to be. We don't want it to be diluted, and we don't want it to take forever, and with a complicated process of multiple waiver steps and signatures and everything else to get those dollars out. We want this. It's not a lot of money. It is ongoing money, though. That is one positive of this. It's not a one-time fund. So that's one. If you're trying to look at one silver lining, you have to look really, really hard for the silver lining. But if you want to look for one, it is ongoing dollars. So those fundings. Okay, Nicole wrote, I will certainly throw the idea at the group. Sounds like it's a good idea to me. We will see if we can either incorporate in our existing guiding groups or do something in alignment with that. I think the answer to that one is yes. Nicole is happy to start a work group. David is happy to agree to volunteer to lead it. Thank you. The cat can be our mascot. We'll bring the cat in.
Yeah, the cat likes meetings.
Yeah, cat knows Zoom.
So Dallas said, did I hear something you'll be leveraging for TK dollars? You know what? It is very much in our interest to have a robust planning process at DCYF and OSPI around what does transitional K look like. I know because of all of our meetings over the last year, it's at the top of many of your priority lists as you see this happening in your area. So it's still a big issue. Yeah, hopefully you guys will be invited to going forward. I know that DCYF had started this process of planning a couple of months ago, and they were going to bring in more directors and other people like Joel and I soon, but I think that the COVID-19 thing has derailed that process a little bit.
Any other questions on the budget?
All right, let's talk about other COVID-19 things. You know, we get a lot of information about things like the small business recoverable loans and the paycheck protection stuff and all of that. I guess my question for you guys is, I've been thinking about whether or not I should be collecting all of those into one place as a resource for you guys out in the field. But you're probably getting all the same emails too, and so I didn't want to duplicate or, you know, make additional place that you'll never go. So what's your thinking? And, you know, other stuff. I know that in our weekly emails, I share things like the resources for immigrants and things like that. But I guess I'm wondering from directors how we can be of additional help and whether that would be an additional help. An ERSI work group. So recruitment. So Rochelle Strong is asking whether there's an ERSI work group. So Maricela, that means recruiting new, it's the sort of, I don't know what all the letters stand for, but it's recruiting families into ECAP and Head Start.
Yeah, I know what it means. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm not sure. That might be a good idea. Do you think that there would be an interest in folks? Because I know that Head Start is telling you guys to continue recruiting for fall, and ECAP as well, I am assuming. So yeah, would you guys be interested in doing a sort of a weekly meetup for the ERSI folks? All right, facilities. Concerned about not having enough space to serve existing kids if the CDC guidelines are followed. Well, that's another interesting question, is how long are these current ratios will ask? That's an interesting one. And, you know, some of these like facilities might be a topic for some directed or specific calls outside of this sort of generalist COVID-19 call. We might want to think about what are the topics that we might want to do some additional thinking and planning on. All right, so I will check. So Nicole Lohr is saying that the family support on the base camp have recruitment roles, and there's an ongoing ECAP ERSI group as well, not for COVID, but for regular check-ins. Part of my challenge here is I don't want to overlap too much, but I do want to provide you guys what you need. Why don't I set up an ERSI meetup that's specific and that's really welcoming to Head Start and to ECAP. I would be interested to hear back around, I'm really thankful to DCYF for setting up all this stuff, and soon I will have their schedule too, so we will incorporate their sort of group discussion calls with our schedule so that there's not so much craziness going on. But yeah, anything that you guys think that we should add on our end, I would appreciate. Okay, so Stacy Moretz, so David Webster asks, has the governor approved the capital budget? David, I think so, and the Early Learning Fund was included. I don't think he vetoed anything in the capital budget, so we're probably good to go, including your kitchen project, but we'll double check and make sure.
Yeah, I believe that's the case, Katie. Nothing, he signed the capital budget in whole and didn't veto.
Stacy Merez says, on the CARES Act call today, Head Start indicated they would prioritize summer services for students going to kindergarten and those with IEPs. we may have to prioritize if ratios remain lower. Yes, so we had last week a call with Dr. Bergeron, the head of the Office of Head Start. And it sounds like there's going to be a fairly simple process for people to apply to do summer services. And one of the things that we've been asking DCYF as well is whether or not there might be an opportunity for ECAP to do something similar. Is there any kind of federal money or whatever that we could that programs could use to apply to do summer services for the incoming kindergartners and special needs kiddos in the summer who have had so many months off. They didn't seem too optimistic, but we're still working on that. We would like that to be available, that kind of concept to be available to both Head Start and ECAP programs. We don't want all of those ECAP kiddos to come in not as ready, right? Nancy Trevina says employment security and other agencies are sending a lot of information about economic resources. So it seems your energy could support other things. And no, I don't have ideas off the top of my head what those other things are. Well, that's good because that means less work. And I know that we're all like overwhelmed. This morning I spent almost a half an hour color coding my Outlook calendar so that I could figure out what my days were looking like over the next few weeks.
We do. I just want to mention we do have a family support meetup on Friday. Is it Friday, right, Katie?
Yeah, Fridays at noon.
And we had a pretty good turnout for that, over 25 family support folks. And it's also open to parents too. So I think people found some benefit of just meeting up and talking about what resources are available and some of the needs of families. So you're all welcome, but if you have family support workers or parent engagement folks or even parents that want to participate, we have room for you on Friday.
So Abby asks, where can I get the link to the Friday meetings? So after this call, I'll be sending out a follow-up email to everybody who participates here and to the directors as well who aren't here. And that has links to all of the meetings, but I can actually also put it in here. Other questions? So Fatima asks, is interpretation provided as well for the family support meetings? And the answer is no. We're not doing simultaneous interpretation for stuff that's primarily for staff. All right, other questions? Does anybody have any announcements, any things that they've heard, any updates?
So Katie, this is Sally, and I have been thinking about this COVID-19 money that's coming out from Head Start, and I've also been thinking about some of our long-term goals around health and nutrition, and Kitty Thomas was at the WASA meeting. She met Dr. Ariella Herman there, and she reminded me of the Healthcare Institute that we had across the state. I think it was in 2008. And so I'm just trying to think of some things that we could do. And it seems like health literacy is, kind of, it's important for families, not to mention all of the stuff that goes on with COVID-19, but it just occurred to me that maybe there's a way to band together, use some of our money to bring back that process, either through webinars or later on, if we're back up and running, maybe just to look at long-term goals. I don't know if anybody else is interested in that, and that's what I wanted to throw it out here for.
Yeah, so so UCLA and Johnson & Johnson had this Healthcare Institute project where they would come in and do training with parents and staff around health literacy, understanding, you know, what's something that where you go to the emergency room or urgent care, what's, you know, so other things like that. The idea was to increase people's understanding and knowledge about health, and also have a sort of knock-on effect of reducing costly emergency room visits when that wasn't having, and getting parents more confident about their own ability to care for children, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that that exists anymore. Their website no longer exists. But it's a great idea. So why don't we think through, maybe we can talk to, maybe we can have some conversation with Jennifer Helseth too at DCYF around this health literacy piece. She's the specialist over at DCYF around health, and think about, and maybe Rebecca Timmons, who's the person at Region 10 TNTA, about what that might look like. And I'll try to reach out to Ariella Herman as well.
Thank you for giving the context. Probably there are a lot of people on the call that weren't involved or weren't aware of what it was. But we did do that Healthcare Institute and replicated it for families. We brought all the parents in. Of course, this was in a different setting when you could all gather, but teaching them health literacy, how to take a child's temperature, what to do when your baby is sick. And I did reach out to Carol Wang at UCLA, and she was really excited about this idea, and she was trying to imagine ways of bringing it back, and also ways of helping us through teaching parents how to respond to the crisis that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so a couple more comments here. Lynn Harlington is interested to see what Head Start programs are thinking about the summer service model. So if anybody wants to weigh in on that, about whether or not you're doing that and what you're going to make it look like. Nicole, so Nicole has said that there's also a family support call through DCYF too. And Nicole, I knew about that. It's just that we had already set ours up when you guys started. So we just continued as we were going. Let's see here. Office of Head Start just put out that they extended the deadline to June 30th for paying staff, which is amazing. And she hopes that ECAP does the same. We just got a question about this today from our lobbyists asking about, what ECAP programs were doing and how long they were going to be paid. And we said, well, you know, through April, and then we'll have some ongoing administrative advocacy to make sure that they're continued to pay through June as well. Melissa McFeeters asks, does anyone have any leads on getting tablets and laptops and internet access for families that do not have them already? The school district where she works is only able to provide them to K-12, and the program we subcontract under is putting it back on the school district to figure out. And Abby Mayers has included a nice link in here, alliancefored.org. Connect with us right now, needs fund. That might be good. Tacoma School District is considering the summer program. And let's see here. OliCap is considering the summer program. Not sure what it will look like. And they were clear on the call that it does not have to look exactly like your existing program. And I would imagine that if we're still at 10 people in a room and under this summer, it's definitely not going to look like what you would have been doing now. Let's see here. Maybe the quality improvement dollars can be used for buying iPads or laptops. Yes, although I think that Melissa is probably ECAP. COVID money might be able to buy iPads. That's a good question. I'm not sure how flexible that is.
I know if you use it as a lending library, they said earlier on a call that if you use that as a lending library to your families or your staff, that it has to be referred to as a lending library, then you could use it.
Right. So you could buy a whole bunch of tablets and provide them to families on a sort of lending basis and then collect them back.
Yep.
Yeah. David Webster says they are talking to staff and parents about their level of interest and will likely file a letter of interest, but as of this morning, the form wasn't available in HSES. Other thoughts, other announcements, other questions? I wonder, Joel, whether this might also, this issue of the tablets and the internet access might not be something that we ask philanthropy about. Maybe they could create some sort of a fund that people could apply to provide technology or technology access.
Yeah, that's on my list. In fact, I was just texting our potential funder, but I want to create a thorough one-pager that outlines some of the potential things that philanthropy could fund, and then start shopping that around to customers.
That sounds great. Other thoughts? Jackie Haight says that the form is available as of 7:30. That just tells me that David was working way too early. All right. Susan Yang asks, are people seeing free Wi-Fi in their communities? We did a staff test to see if folks had access. That's a good question. We don't have free Wi-Fi in my neighborhood.
My in-laws try to steal the school Wi-Fi, but that's another.
Well, it's not stealing, Joel.
I know. It's like, it's just available.
Huh. Reports in, so not in Grant County. Reports in unincorporated Pierce County was that the free access being offered by Comcast was, quote, used up, end quote, and they weren't adding new accounts. That was last week. Oh yeah, Xfinity, right. Yeah. Benton County, yeah. So I think, so yeah, if you mean the Comcast thing, that's, I think that's available everywhere that has Comcast, but if they're full up, then maybe no. All right. Other questions? Maricela, any comments or questions from the Spanish line?
No, not now.
Okay.
I just want to add something about, I was on a call on Saturday related to people with DACA and TPS. Solamente quiero comentar algo. Estuve en una llamada relacionada con las personas que reciben DACA y TPS. So they are going to be part of the stimulus only if they don't have on their tax form people with ITN. So if they report their taxes and they don't have anyone on their tax form with ITN, they will receive stimulus. But if they have someone on their tax form that are under the ITIN program, they don't receive the check of the stimulus.
That sucks. All right. So let's see here. Anybody else? I think Margaret Santalucia is asking about Wi-Fi being an issue in their rural area. So if people have suggestions, send them her way or my way. All right, well, thank you all so much for all the work that you do and for doing the for joining us on these calls, and email me with anything. I'll send out a follow-up email later today or first thing tomorrow morning with more information, and hope you have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.